I'm Carrie Barber reporting for Digital Liberation Front, and today I have for you a story that is important for everyone across the entire nation. We've heard about COVID affected nursing homes, but there is a pandemic going across the nation where our disabled, our elderly, and other people in limited means are being taken advantage of in what can rightly be described as state sanctioned kidnapping and extortion. So I'm so pleased to bring to you today a critical interview and introduce you to Rick Black with CEAR, an advocacy group working to change the law. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Black.
Thanks, Carrie. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your organization.
Yes, SEER is a national nonprofit, 501c3. We counsel victims of estate trafficking and other probate frauds. We generally tell people what attorneys won't admit goes on within the probate environment. We also advocate at state capitals and in Washington, D.C. For rights, additional rights for the disabled, adults, seniors, who and their protections within the legal environment and specifically the predatory legal environment. We were first exposed to these type crimes back in 2013 when my wife's father was taken captive in Las Vegas. Through that advocacy effort, we were able to gain 10 criminal convictions of attorneys and guardians who used the probate environment to exploit the vulnerable and conduct criminal acts. We've testified in front of the Department of Justice on these crimes in Washington, D.C. A documentary was written about the work that we did in Nevada called The Guardians, and we've counseled nearly 4,000 cases over the last 6 years.
So you used a term that people might not be familiar with. You said estate trafficking. Can you describe what that is?
Yeah, it's a phrase that we've coined. We originally called it human trafficking, and in our discussions with DOJ and legislative personnel in DC in 16, 17, 18, one day they pulled me aside and said, Rick, you really ought to change your terminology because you're talking about a legitimate issue. It's one that we agree needs to be addressed through legislation as well as investigations, but there's a current federal criminal statute on human trafficking and peonage. It's a technical legal term that applies to individuals who are trafficked for services, sex, pornography, labor. And this crime really doesn't fall within that criminal statute. And so you confuse federal investigators, prosecutors, legislatures when you use that. So with that challenge, we took the opportunity, came up with estate trafficking, because really what occurs in this environment is no different than trafficking guns or drugs or other paraphernalia. And in this case, attorneys are able to intercept entire estates for nothing and traffic it to themselves and to their networks with really no regard for the law or risk to the law.
So just to make this distinction, because I think we're pretty well familiar as a populace of a nefarious home health worker who comes into the home under the pretenses of helping with a disabled individual or one of our elderly family members. But that's not exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about lawyers and probate.
I am, Carrie, but this applies to Medicare, Medicaid fraud programs, which are rather rampant within the developmentally disabled environment, as well as estate trafficking. We see three primary frauds committed in this environment by the predatory legal community. Estate trafficking by far is the largest, but hospitals over the last 30 years have adopted guardianship to mitigate risk on receivables, risk on malpractice, risk on unruly loved ones who continue to demand services that they no longer want to provide to an individual. Once they put or call a local attorney and ask that the person be placed into guardianship, that person will be removed from that hospital in relatively short order, and the risk is removed with them. And it can be all types of risk, as I said, liability, malpractice, receivables. We have proof in states like Nevada, Virginia, Florida, where hospitals are paying local attorneys up to $10,000 to get a head out of their bed so that they can get a higher profit head into that bed. The downstream organizations, long-term care organizations, home health care organizations that then pick up those heads, once they're in guardianship, people have no protection. So these are perfect candidates for Medicare and Medicaid fraud because no one who truly loves them and cares about their services and that they're receiving the services, therapies, treatments that they qualify for, that they're actually being provided. So it creates the perfect environment for Medicare and Medicaid fraud.
So are you comfortable sharing your own personal story about, you had mentioned that you started this organization based on your personal experience with this. Can you take us through not only your story, but maybe some other stories to help illustrate how this happens?
Yeah, we have thousands, and our story has been well documented, but it's simple. My wife's dad chose to move to Las Vegas, Nevada at the age of 73. He was renting from a longtime family friend. It was a test. Hey, if I like it, I have friends out there that work at the casinos, work in entertainment. He was a sax player, an excellent sax player, and we wanted to enjoy his life. And if it didn't work out, he could always come back and live with us. We were in Indiana at the time. What we didn't anticipate was that he would become vulnerable to dementia, Alzheimer's type, and his landlord and friend, family friend, would then choose to take advantage of it. And when my wife, who was the executor of his will, who was the agent of all of his affairs, was a joint account holder on all of his accounts, when she discovered that the friend had stolen $220,000, she took it up with her dad to ask what had happened to the funds. And he denied that his funds had ever been moved from his accounts in Pittsburgh, where he had lived his entire life. When my wife took action, the landlord, live-in, caregiver, friend, lover, pick all the names you want for it, then took him captive. And when we went to his aid and called the police because we had 3 canceled checks that showed the theft, he was being isolated. He was in very poor condition at that time due to the dementia. They refused to engage, and they directed us to file for guardianship because that's how these things are resolved. It's a civil matter. It wasn't a civil matter at all. It was a criminal matter, but they refused to engage. And that's when we filed for guardianship in 2013. And that took us down an odyssey that I honestly thought could never happen in our country. He lost his life. We were never able to gain guardianship. The system took over. Eventually, the exploitive girlfriend got full guardianship, removing the family from any ability to protect and care for my wife's dad. He lost his life, his feet black with gangrene a year after the guardianship was created, and the family lost over $1 million in the ordeal. But our story isn't isolated. This happens thousands of times across America every year. The only thing that made our case a little different, Carrie, was my first time in a courtroom in my entire life. I could see this environment's perverted. This environment has no interest in protecting my father-in-law, my wife, or my family, or his money. Their intent was to exploit. And when I started researching records, which is now in the thousands, one Nevada is an open record state, so I could see all the petitions, all the filings, all the exhibits. You could see the pattern and practice very easy. And I took 100 cases to the Nevada Attorney General in early 2015, which got him to open an investigation, which has now yielded the 10 criminal convictions of attorneys and professional guardians. We took it a step further. I left my profession that I loved and enjoyed for 35 years. And this is all I do 7 days a week, helping counsel families, trying to duplicate the success that we gained in Nevada between 2015 and 2017, because it can be translated nationwide. The disappointment is we haven't gotten another attorney general in the 50 states or 6 territories under US control to agree to launch a similar type investigation, which would clearly prove the same criminal acts that we uncovered in Nevada.
So you had alluded to this is happening in other states and in other places, and that this is really a function of probate and how guardianship laws work in each state. So can you take us through, we've seen examples of Nevada. What other areas have you personally witnessed similar situations where guardianship is taken away from family members and applied to a state or local appointed guardian?
It happens nationwide. We identify hotspots through the calls that come into SEER and the research that we do. Washington, California, Nevada, Texas, the Bible Belt states have a massive problem. Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Alabama. This is a system that your listeners need to understand. We grew up in an environment where we think of the law or judges through the eyes of Perry Mason or Judge Judy. The criminal law system is funded by the state, tons of oversight, and a very high burden of proof because we don't want to send innocent people to prison. The civil, the second branch, there's 3 branches of judiciary in our country. The second branch, the civil branch, is where major civil suits, big corporations, are brought before the court, and those are most often adjudicated in front of juries of our peers. Criminal courts are all adjudicated with juries. Civil courts, most are. The equity court, the third branch, which we derisively call the family squabbles court, because that's where divorce, child custody, adult guardianship, and probate matters are resolved, are all heard in front of a single judge who happens to be a member of a social organization called the county or state bar. In that environment, one person decides the future of your loved one, of your funds, because the equity court is fully funded by the funds of families. You take someone to court in equity, either you're funding that proceeding or the one that you have targeted has funded it. And in the case of adult guardianship, once the first order for guardianship is signed, the court takes over the estate. And now all the attorneys have the ability to feed off of that estate to fund the litigation, oftentimes completely fabricated litigation. So back to your question, in the probate environment, the root cause is negligent judges because there is no checks and balances, there is no oversight, there is really no motivation for a judge to be discerning and protective of the innocent unless they have a moral compass that drives them in that direction. For the most part, they are there to distribute wealth to fellow members of the bar. And that's a reality that most Americans today are unaware of. And that's what we try to do in our education and outreach efforts.
So what success have you had? Are you getting receptive lawmakers, or are you still finding that you're getting pushback in specific areas in making reforms, meaningful reforms to this?
We're getting pushback across the board on meaningful reforms. We're active in about 25 states. with local activist groups who are working at the state capitol level, working with victims at the county level. Um, we made progress in Nevada with some key reforms that were put into place in 2017 there. But the predatory legal community is now working around those reforms, compromising key individuals so that they can again make money off of this dysfunctional adult guardianship system. What bothers us most is when you look at the four corner pivotal states, California, Texas, New York, Florida. I think I captured them all with that. Those state governments, both executive and legislative branch, have worked hard to deny these complaints. So although there's been a lot of charades being played, ruses with certain changes, legislative improvements that the legislators have been convinced by input from the state bar that this will protect the public. When you look at it at the grassroots level, within those courtrooms and the orders that are signed every day, what you see is the atrocities are growing. No state has taken this on to truly address it, to protect the public and hold predatory attorneys accountable.
So it almost feels like a hopeless situation, and we've all got aging parents or disabled family members, things like that. What can we do to protect ourselves and protect the assets that our family members have worked so hard to accumulate?
Yeah, I'll answer it two ways. First of all, you got to be prepared as an individual. And that preparation means having a durable power of attorney executed and notarized, naming your agent and hopefully a backup agent. The same thing with your healthcare advance directive. These crimes are committed while you're still living. They're committed in nefarious trusts that attorneys draft for individuals who don't really understand trust law and what they're exposing themselves through with a trust. Nefarious attorneys that promote guardianship on a bait and switch tactic, get you to file not knowing, or you not knowing, that as soon as that order for guardianship is signed, the whole game changes. You lose all of your rights. Your loved ones lose all their rights, and they can easily be traded out with, quote, a professional guardian who then conducts the estate trafficking aspect. So number one is get those documents in place, get them notarized, and assigned an agent that you fully trust, who is courageous and honest, who will come to fight for you if you become vulnerable or sick or injured. 50% of all Americans 65 years old today do not have those documents executed. They should be executed at age 18, knowing that you can modify them at any time if you see a problem with your designated agent to further protect you throughout life. That's number one. The bigger one is getting people educated to the risk and having them, more importantly, speak out on the issues. Become activists. The movie I Care a Lot, which launched on Netflix just this weekend, is doing a lot in that direction. We are on several social media sites across international social media sites, and it's amazing the feedback we're getting that tell me this isn't true. Is this really happening? And we, as well as other activists around the country, are using this movie and its awakening of the general public to alert them that, yes, this is real. The first half of that movie I have experienced personally hundreds of times. Predatory guardians supported by predatory attorneys who understand their latitude and leverage within that environment. So become educated and become active, because this problem is not going to be solved by executive, legislative, or law enforcement authorities. They've ignored this for 4 or 5 decades, and they're going to continue to ignore it until they recognize the majority of the population of the US is fed up with it and they want to see changes.
Excellent. I really appreciate that. My last question for you is, we've seen so many of the constructs of our society, our legislative, legal, really fall away in the pandemic of COVID and expose some of the weaknesses that we have as a public in protecting ourselves, protecting our communities. Have you seen that kind of effect over the last year during the COVID pandemic, particularly when it comes to protecting those in state homes or nursing centers?
The pandemic has been a blessing for us and for a lot of other people because it has exposed the dysfunction, the weakness in a lot of these public service systems that our tax dollars pay for that do not function efficiently and often function in complete contradictory of their claimed benefits. Issues with long-term care and neglect, malpractice, abuse have been rampant for years. The pandemic put a spotlight on it in Florida, in New York, in Texas, in Virginia, in California. And now they've lost their ability to hide their wrongdoing, and the public is starting to get engaged and enraged. So we see the issues more clearly now than we ever have. And while I don't approve of storming the Capitol, the fact that Donald Trump became president is because people are fed up. The fact that 170 million Americans turned out for the 2020 election is because Americans are fed up. They're fed up with status quo. They're fed up with political bickering instead of engaging to fix the problems that still exist within America, a great country, and the systems that are dysfunctional and have lost their ability to serve the public. Joe Biden has a big agenda ahead of him. I hope he's open to tackling the issues that have been brought forth by both the 2016 and the 2020 election. And most of all, I hope the American public stays engaged and keeps him focused and everyone in Washington, D.C. to do more for the vulnerable in our country, our disabled, our seniors, those who have made this country great and are now looked at nothing more than a cash cow.
Well, I want to thank you again so much for your time and sharing your story, and as well as the advocacy work that you're doing. So I hope that everyone who is watching this will go out to the website, learn more information, and take part in the videos and information that you've provided there. So any last thoughts that you want to leave our audience with, things that they maybe need to consider as they move forward with protecting their own families and looking into this issue a little bit more?
And thanks, Carrie, a ton for the interview, but get those estate documents executed, avoid trust, put a lot of faith in your durable power of attorney and your healthcare advance directive, and get active, speak out. Write letters to your county commissioners, to your chief judge in your county, to your DA, to your sheriff, and most importantly, your federal legislators, congressmen and senators, and demand that they do something to protect Americans vulnerable. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of Digital Liberation Front, I am Carrie Barber. Thank you for watching.